Hi, my name is Andi. I'm a chaotic reader, and there was a point in time, somewhere around June, when I was questioning if I will ever get to do another reading wrap-up, because none of the books were hitting their marks. But here I am, so let's talk about the highlight reads and the major letdowns of the last 5 months actually. Everything started out well when I picked up the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is titled Emily Wilde's Map of Otherlands. This year I'm trying to read more sequels, and I'm enjoying how easy it is to slip back into a story where you're already familiar with the world building and the character motivations. Emily was still very much refreshing to read, as an anti-main character almost. No hero complex, no saving the world, she just wants to do her own thing. Her research takes her to Austria in this story, which is where I live currently, so it was funny to read about a fantasy reimagination of it. In that sense, I would say the sequel took the fairy depictions to the next level with the same amount of eeriness. Emily and Vandal's dynamic receives a lot more focus than in the first book, with some forces threatening their affections, and while they have a lot more cute moments, I somehow felt a bit let down with the super slow moving progress of their relationship. But that might just be me. Another thing that was a bit weaker this time was the side characters. Emily's niece is there and another professor, but they felt rather like plot devices at certain points rather than the layered side characters, and I caught myself not really caring about them, to be honest. Overall, the sequel very much kept the original whimsical but eerie vibes, a bit more slow-paced even, and it still hasn't answered all of the questions, so I'm looking forward to the third part that will be released next year, if I remember correctly. Things went downhill from there when I thought, what if I pick up a gothic, lush fantasy story? And Only a Monster seemed to fit these requirements based on the cover. If you have seen my mid-year book freakout tag, I named it as the biggest disappointment I read this year, and I struggled to find any redeeming qualities to it. First of all, it's not a gothic fantasy, very far from it. It's about monsters who time travel by stealing time from humans, and a hero whose mission is to wipe out these monster clans. I don't know if it's the word choice monster that bothered me from the beginning. Maybe demon or some other word would have been a better fit, but the whole plot felt very messy. The book is written in very short sentences, a very snappy tone of voice, with little descriptive details, which was very disorienting to read. The world building lacks depth, the character motivations lack depth, there is very little introspection about the whole being a monster and causing harm dilemma, and the connection between the characters felt super rushed and out of the blue, and the plot twist was not built up well and just left me even more confused. This book was very much not enjoyable. I'm not even sure how or why I finished it. It also has one of my major pet peeves with the main characters, when they are clueless for a bit, but then they know exactly what to do. That just annoys me so much. After that less than enjoyable reading experience, I was like, okay, I need to choose my next read carefully. I need something I know will live up to my expectations, so I reached for the familiar Leigh Bardugo's latest release. It did not blow me away the same way Six of Crows or Ninth House did, unfortunately. I liked the foreshadowing storytelling style, like if only she knew that everything was to change with that one thing, because that kept me engaged, but I felt like a lot of the things were hinted at, and it was a bit hard to keep up. There were too little things revealed for the stakes to feel as high as they should have been, especially around the climax of the story, in my opinion. What Leigh Bardugo does masterfully though is gradually exploring the character dynamics and introducing their motivations in a way that feels organic and not info dumpy. There are central themes in the story like female rage and loneliness that were woven into the whole King's Tournament plotline really well. There's also romance, but there are so many other emotions layered into it, positive and negative, and that complexity I very much enjoyed. So I would say The Familiar raised the bar a bit, but still not back to that level where I was at the beginning of the year when I read a few 5-star books after each other. I expected my next read to continue this positive trend, but I was let down again. Heartless Hunter has a premise of a witch and witch hunter romance with deception, which sounded interesting to me. It is set in a world that went through a revolution where witches need to hide their powers, and we have our main character Rune, who poses as a young socialite by the day, but she rescues her fellow witches at night as the Crimson Moth. The setting was actually unique, with balls and luncheons, but also a witch hunter army, kind of, that formed in a system that oppresses witches. It is not first-person POV, thank God, but we do get perspective changes in who we follow, Rune or Gideon, who is a high-ranking witch hunter and obviously the love interest. Their dynamic is tension-filled as they both have the reasons to seduce each other and keep each other close for information. It was a solid 4-star book until like 85%, where Rune makes some choices that made me roll my eyes super hard, and it all went downhill from there. A little bit of spoilers, I will wait a few seconds if you wanna fast forward this part. See you in a few seconds with some more spoiler-free yapping. Okay, so I wasn't the biggest fan of the soft brother, cold brother element, especially the love triangle. There needs to be a conflict while they cannot be together, and the little brother's crush felt like a very flimsy one and not very complex either. It kind of felt like the author wrote themselves into a corner because you cannot really solve this conflict. So the younger brother had to die, which again was such a cheap way of solving this whole conundrum. Overall, the setting had a lot of potential, but the world building didn't really go into depth in the first book. The characters had some good tension, but the conflicts were rather flimsy and not cleverly solved, and the ending turned it into a direction that I'm not sure I like. Let me know your thoughts if you have read this book, because all I see online is praise for this, so I wonder if I'm alone with my opinion. I stayed with my favorite genre, and talking about unique settings, I picked up a Fate Inked in Blood, which is inspired by Norse mythology. The book was released earlier this year, and a lot of people were looking forward to it, given Danielle L. Jensen is a beloved author with her Bridge Kingdom series. I personally did not like the Bridge Kingdom. I DNF'd it after like 16% because it felt a bit bland, but I understand the love for it. A Fate Inked in Blood had one of the strongest starts to any story I've ever read. There is a fight scene between the love interest as the opening. It was chef's kiss. And that was the best part of the story because the plot ran out of steam very fast. We follow Freya, who is forced to reveal herself as the Shield Maiden, blessed by a drop of a goddess's blood, and prophesies to unite the nation. Or more accurately, whoever controls the Shield Maiden's fate is prophesied to unite the nation, which is currently fractured into different Viking tribes. You can tell by this setting alone, a lot of the emphasis is on agency and the loss of it, plus she's something they call unfated, which means that anything she does has the power to change her destiny, and that is also one of the moral dilemmas. The world building was immersive with warring Viking tribes, sometimes a bit too convenient, but you get plenty of adventuring and battle scenes. The romance is complex enough to satisfy my taste, with the son of the tribe leader being the love interest, who is sworn to protect her so she can fulfill her Shield Maiden destiny, but of course there is plenty of tension. The plot twist in the end is sort of predictable, and it kind of failed to draw me in emotionally, but it was a solid read. The next book is already scheduled for next year, probably I will give it a try. From Norse mythology, I went to Six Crimson Cranes, which draws upon Asian folklore elements mixed with a bit of Western fairy tales. It all played like a Chinese costume drama in my head, and I very much enjoyed it. Our main character, Shiori, the young princess, is banished by her evil stepmother, and her 6 brothers are turned into cranes, further cursing her not to say a word, otherwise her brothers will die. In that sense, it falls into a bit of a pitfall of mythology retellings. You as the reader know what to expect when you are familiar with some of these stories. The characters don't have much depth. Some are evil, some are good, but there is little deeper moral exploration. Evil is evil for evil's sake. My favorite character was definitely the dragon boy, who just appears and disappears. Very Haku-coded, I have to say. I hope maybe he gets a bigger focus in the next book. There is a sequel, The Dragon's Promise, but in this book we reach an endpoint and then the next conflict starts, which I appreciated because in this way the story is not stretched over 2 books, because that can be a bit of a hit or miss with me. Next up, I took a break from romantasy and read Just for the Summer and This Is How You Lose the Time War. I won't go into too much detail with them, as I made a dedicated reading vlog about it, where I also talk about the reading slump I was experiencing. Very visceral descriptions in This Is How You Lose the Time War, which I enjoyed. The story reads through letters addressed to each other by 2 rival time-traveling agents. A short read. Give it a try if you are looking for something unique and emotional. I expected Just for the Summer to be a cute little beach read. It's very much not that. There is an exploration of parental neglect and emotional abuse. I felt like the story dealt with these issues in a very raw and non-glamorizing way. The romance, in my opinion, was the weakest part of the plot. I enjoyed the 2 characters' own journeys through facing their own traumas a lot more. At that point, I still wasn't fully out of my reading slump, so I took my own advice and instead of picking up a new author, I finally read Circe by Madeline Miller. This hit me emotionally, but not as much as The Song of Achilles. In a lot of ways, I feel like the 2 stories are complete opposites. Well, obviously, but hear me out. Circe's witch skills are the antithesis to the divinity that Achilles represented, which was effortless and celebrated, where here Circe's is learned and she has very much struggled with it. It's a different perspective on immortality. Achilles was very much about establishing his legacy and getting to share it with Patroclus. Here Circe struggles with her immortality and the fleeting human lives she shares it with. In that sense, female loneliness is very much in the center of this story. And last but not least, the real tragedy of The Song of Achilles was the short lives that Achilles and Patroclus lived, but here the tragedy is the long life of Circe. The book reads very much like a Greek epos. In order to resolve the story, all the earliest conflicts need to be undone that kickstarted the plot. I was not let down by Circe. I recommend it to everyone who enjoyed The Song of Achilles for a bit of a different take on Greek mythology. It's just getting darker and darker. Welcome to autumn in Austria. After that emotional read, my brain was a bit fried, so I was craving a light-hearted, easy fantasy book. So I went for Summon to the Wilds, the sequel of Thrown in the Dark, which I read at the beginning of the year and rated 4.75 stars. We continue Amma and Damien's adventures to free his demonic father and discover her hidden powers. The action or the actual plot wasn't the strongest in the first part, but here it's very slow to pick up, a bit flimsy, and the vibes don't really make up for it, unlike in the first book. It was a quick read, extremely good to switch off my brain for a bit, but the second book felt like a filler. The plot was going nowhere, but the pining vibes were also not there that elevated the first book. I'm a bit conflicted whether or not to finish the series, maybe on an airplane or something, but I was a bit let down by the sequel because it failed to further the plot and meaningfully deepen the romantic relationship. So I had a bit of a romantasy fatigue and was searching for something with a bit more extensive world building, featuring a group of main characters and not just two, and ended up reading The Gilded Wolves. I have to start it with, I don't think it compares to Six of Crows, sadly, and it's because of the lack of complex relationships. The thing that bothered me the most was probably that a lot of the relationship elements happened in the past, like the characters recalled that this happened and that happened, but we as readers only got their present feelings attached to them. It felt like we were watching everything from afar. Somehow the characters, their troubles, their hopes and dreams didn't feel close, and that made the plot twists a lot less impactful as well. The stakes were supposed to be high towards the end, but it didn't really come through. I had a hard time believing that this group was successful, as things always went sideways one way or another. Overall, I liked the historical fantasy aspect and the characters themselves, and there were some interesting elements to them, but the story failed to create a good group dynamic that should have been the basis of everything. At this point, you have to understand, I was desperate. None of the books I read in the past few months scratched the itch, and I was left craving something more. So I made the mistake of starting Broken Bonds, which is the first book in a paranormal reverse harem series. This was my first time reading reverse harem, which means one female main character and several potential male love interests, and I cannot say that this book convinced me that I enjoy this genre. However, I have to hand it to this book, it single-handedly pulled me out of my reading slump. I think I finished it in like 2 days and afterwards made 2 notes. The first being, why did I do this to myself? And the second being, read super fast though. In this story we have a bond system with always one person at the center of it and them having several bonds with other people, which also works somehow to amplify each other's powers. Our main character Ollie ran away from her own bonds for a reason, and she spends the entire first book just being angry and fighting with most of the 5 men. They have very little understanding for each other, and they don't even really try, which frustrated me a lot. I think the only reason I finished this book is to see if that would change, but nope, not in the first book at least. Afterwards I picked up the second book, Savage Bonds, but DNF'd it at 40% or so because it felt like the relationship dynamics were going nowhere. Supposedly each book in the series is dedicated to one of the men and their backstories, but to be honest, I have zero interest in finishing the series. The one thing Broken Bonds did well though is pull me out of a reading slump, so afterwards I was excited to jump into Forest of Dreams and Whispers, and finally a fantasy romance book that delivered. It's a bit of a reverse Cinderella story, with the Fae Prince, Prince Hawthorne, being cursed that on his 18th birthday, at the first drop of his blood, the kingdom and all of the Fae will fall into deep slumber. Enter Juliana, his personal guard and personal menace, who is sworn to break the curse. This was lovely in all aspects. Prince Hawthorne is very much like Vandal from Emily Wilde or Howl from Howl's Moving Castle. There is a lot of teasing, a lot of flirty banter, and we all get all the scenes we want to see. They get injured, there's only one bed, they see each other's scars, amazing. The love story is built up step by step, the author manages to keep it interesting, it doesn't feel rushed, and their feelings make sense toward each other, which is more rare in romantasy than you would think. I'm so happy I finally got to a book I rated close to 5 stars again. I'm not sure if I want to pick up the sequel because it features new characters, kind of set in the same world, but I could see myself reaching for it or even checking out other Fae stories from the same author. So those were all the books from the last 5 months basically. Let me know if you have read any of them and what were your thoughts. See you in my next video. Until then, take care. Bye!